Hey, welcome to another edition of Fight for Justice. Tonight we're going to take on the subject of insurance, particularly automobile insurance. We may talk a little bit about homeowners policies and life insurance so that you can be acquainted with some of the coverage you can get, why you ought to have it, and kind of what it does for you. I think the first thing we'll talk about tonight is automobile insurance. Now, generally, Alabama requires and is mandatory that you carry automobile liability insurance. That was not always the law. That came into effect several years ago. But on January the 1st, 2013, it now is a crime not to carry automobile liability insurance. It's a misdemeanor, which generally means a fine, and they can impose other penalties besides a fine. Now, how you might come in contact with that is when you go to register your car or you're going to get a tag, you have to provide proof or evidence of insurance. And that comes from your insurance company. As most of you probably know, you're given a little card that you bring to the office where the tags are issued or the titles are given when you try to register the car. And you show them proof that you got insurance. Alabama was one of the worst states in the country for the number of drivers who are uninsured. So that's why it's important that you get insurance. You're required to do it, and it's just good policy. Now, what you can do, we're going to talk a minute about it, is the type of coverages you can buy if you want it, and why it's important when you have a personal injury claim or an accident in your car. And we can also talk to you a little bit about why having a lawyer involved, if you have a claim, can be very beneficial. Sometimes it's not necessary, but you need to get advice anyway, whether we do anything for you or some other lawyer of your choice does anything for you. Now, we've got some graphics up there that we're going to put up on the screen, and these will show you the types of, most of coverages are available. And this is a real policy. Yeah, it's up now. No, please bring the other one up, the rates. That's the wrong screen. We'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, here we go, auto coverage. What's required by the state of Alabama is liability coverage. This is a sample of a policy that shows you the cost for a 100/300 policy with a $25,000 damage amount of coverage. $109. This is only a fairly new car. These coverage amounts can vary. The minimum required by Alabama is $25,000, $50,000. What that means is that you have liability coverage $25,000 per person who may make a claim against you if you're responsible. The $50,000 is a total for each accident, so that's the split. And the property damage is exactly what it shows, $25,000 for property damage that you may cause as a result of an accident. This liability coverage is required in lesser amounts than showed on the screen, as I just explained. You need to carry it because if you don't, your personal assets will be exposed to a claim for that. Now, the medical payments is another coverage that you can buy. You don't have to buy it. This is a sample where you have $5,000 medical payments. It's not very expensive. Brim, would you explain what the medical payments coverage does for you?
Sure, that would pay for any medical expense that you would have should you be in an accident. We commonly call it med pay.
And that would be available to the other person that you may have injured?
Yeah, well, yes.
And it might be available to yourself?
It can be available to yourself as well.
It can be both ways. The next item up there is what's called comprehensive, and comprehensive you see is relatively cheap, much cheaper than the other two kinds, the collision and the liability coverage. So talk a minute, if you would, about what comprehensive does for you.
Well, comprehensive coverage would include the cleaning up of the area where the accident occurred, the towing of your vehicle should it not be able to be driven, to a storage facility, and then the payments of to the storage facility for actually storing your vehicle until you can get it somewhere where it's going to be worked on.
Okay, so this is sort of for the minor incidentals that are connected with a wreck. But this helps you with your vehicle.
Yes.
The liability is to the other driver if you're at fault, but the comprehensive is to your vehicle, and so is collision. Now, collision, you see, is about 3 times more expensive than comprehensive. Now, tell us what collision does and why that is it's more expensive.
Well, collision is going to cover a vehicle hitting or being hit by another vehicle or object, which can include something flying off of a car or a limb falling from a tree, or it can include, in our sample policy that we have, the overturning of a covered vehicle. It can include a one-car accident. If you weren't involved in a two-person or even more than a two-person accident, if you were in a single-car accident, then it would cover you there.
Now, again, you don't have to buy comprehensive, you don't have to buy collision, you don't have to buy medical payments. The only thing you're required to buy is liability. But if you want to make sure you've got adequate protection, you hear a lot of people talk about, I've got full coverage. What does that mean?
Typically, when someone says they have full coverage, it means that they have just about everything that you can add on to a policy: comprehensive, collision, liability, med pay.
All these things are for your own benefit.
Well, some liability is definitely to your own benefit, as it protects you in the event that you're at fault in an accident. It can help you.
All right, let's go to the second part of that. 3 more types of coverage. Emergency road service, I think everybody knows what that is.
Absolutely.
You can get towing in if you have, or help with a vehicle. A lot of companies sell that. You get a battery or somebody starts your engine or whatever, it may help you. Now the next item, U coverage. What is uninsured motorist coverage?
Uninsured motorist coverage is something that's very important that everyone should have. It's going to be relatively inexpensive depending on how much you get.
By the
and
way,
this one it's 100 and.
By the way, I just noticed the word uninsured is misspelled up there, so I don't know who typed that, but it should be uninsured.
Yes.
And it basically is to cover, if you get in a wreck with a car that has no insurance, you can look to your own company to pay for your damage up to the limits of liability.
That's right. And unfortunately, there are quite a few people that drive without insurance. And should you be hit by a person without insurance, then this would pay for any damages that you have as far as injuries to yourself, medical bills, pain and suffering, things of that nature.
Whatever the driver was responsible for.
Right.
Let me tell you one more thing. In Alabama, you don't have to buy uninsured motorist coverage, but the insurance companies are required by law to offer it to you. You have to affirmatively reject it. We strongly recommend, without reservation, that you buy uninsured motorist coverage. It's not expensive. It's probably, next to liability, is the most valuable coverage you can have. And we're going to explain that to you in the second session, which will start here in just a few seconds. So if you don't have it, go buy it. Buy as much of it as you can get. Don't take the minimum. That's our advice. We'll see you in a minute. Okay, welcome back to the second part of our show. We were talking about insurance and particularly uninsured coverage that you can buy on your automobile, and we've said we strongly recommend that you buy it. The minimum that can be offered to you in the state, and has to be offered to you, is $25,000. If you don't want it, you have to sign a paper saying I don't want it with your insurance company, and the value of that coverage is enormous. I think I said in an earlier show one time I had a client who came in with a claim, and they found out the other driver who caused the wreck didn't have enough coverage, so they had rejected the uninsured coverage. And what that means is you have lost the opportunity because of your own mistake to receive adequate compensation for your claim. So it's really valuable. It's not very expensive, and it's also known as underinsured coverage. A lot of times, and we're going to have a graphic for you in a minute to show this to you, you'll be involved in a wreck. Your damages will exceed their liability coverage in Alabama. Here's the graphic. The minimum coverage that you're required to carry is $25,000. But what if your damages exceed that? If they exceed that, then there's another place you can look, and it's to your own insurance policy, which carries uninsured or underinsured coverage. And I've given you 3 examples up there to look at. Let's take the first column. That's the injured party's damages. Suppose the injured party is you, and you have $10,000 in damages that you can prove. And that could be property loss, it can be medical bills, pain and suffering, whatever. And the other driver has no insurance. What do? Well, you've got to go to your own insurance company, and your insurance company will pay, assuming the other driver is responsible. Now, the example I started to give you a minute ago, no, we got to go back. Yeah, thank you. Is your insurance company will pay. Well, what if, on the second example, number 2, you have damages of $10,000, same amount, and you have your insurance for the other driver has $25,000. They will pay the $10,000. If you have uninsured coverage, it doesn't reach that level. So there's no pay from them. It doesn't need to be, because you're made whole by them paying your damages. The third example is the one that's most problematic for anybody. Let's suppose that your injured party, you as the injured party, have $35,000 in damages, and the other driver has $25,000 in coverage. They pay that. Well, you're $10,000 short. Where do you go? You go to your own insurance company, which has underinsured coverage. It says on your policy it's uninsured, meaning the other driver doesn't have any, but it also means underinsured, which means the other driver doesn't have enough. So then you get your own company, assuming the other driver is responsible, to pay that $10,000. Now, there is a danger, a real danger, and we're going to cover this in the third segment of the show again because it's so important. And that's that if you don't have a lawyer, and this is where lawyers earn their money, you can lose that underinsured coverage because you don't know what to do. We've had people come in who've settled with an insurance company, and it wasn't enough money from the other driver, and it was too late to bring a claim against your own insurance company. So you've lost that right, and nothing we can do to get it back. Freeman, you want to comment on that underinsured coverage?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what you said, how important that is, and how important it is to follow the rules to make sure you don't lose it. Another thing that I think is important to note about uninsured, underinsured coverage is that it can be used to cover other people in your household. If a member of your household, they don't have to be driving in the car, but if they are injured, by way of operating the vehicle, then that can be used to cover them as well. You can also, what's called, and I'm sure we're going to get into this later, what's called stacking. Uninsured, underinsured policies can be stacked on top of each other, which would mean if you had 3 cars on a policy and you had uninsured, underinsured coverage, and you had $25,000 policy, then you could stack those on top of each other in an accident, and that would go from 25, since you had 3 cars, it would become 75.
And that makes the lawyer worthwhile, because a lot of times the insurance people are not going to tell you about that.
That's right.
Now, also, there's a distinction, and this is odd, but it's a distinction in Alabama law. If you have one policy that insures multiple cars, you can only stack 3 policies together. Only 3. You're limited to add 2 more to your original claim. But if you have individual policies and you have 5 cars, you can add all 5 of them. So then you can get to $125,000. So there's an argument there for making sure you have individual policies on each car rather than all under one policy, because then it becomes limited.
Something we talked about one of our last shows that I think is important to say again is that it's always important you contact someone to get advice from a lawyer, because oftentimes the insurance company is not going to tell you about all of these different things and ways to go through your claim to maximize the amount of money you get.
And that you're entitled to.
That's right.
Like loss of value.
That's right.
Tell us about loss of value.
Loss of value would basically mean, I think we've talked about this before, would be if you're in say you have a new car that's worth $30,000 and you're in an accident, and that accident maybe only has $5,000 worth of damage to the vehicle.
To repair it.
To repair it. But after those repairs are done, people, if you turn around and had to sell that car, it's going to be worth less money.
Or trade it in.
Or trade it in. Nowadays, there's Carfax, there's all of these ways to see if a car has been in a collision of any kind, and it automatically makes the car worth less money. I just got one the other day where, a guy got $2,000 in lost value, and there was only, $500 worth of damages, but it was a new car. And so even $500 in damages to a new car can have a substantial effect on the value of the car after.
So you got loss of value.
That's right.
And do you often hear about that from claims adjusters? Oh, by the way, you need to make a claim for loss of value?
No, you will never hear that from a claims adjuster.
But you come to us and we'll tell you. Now, does that mean that you need a lawyer in every case you have? No, it doesn't. We're not here to tell you that. But a lot of times we give people advice so they know how to maximize their damages. Mainly we're looking for, we like to handle cases involve substantial loss, substantial personal injury, because those are much harder, and we'll talk about that in the third segment.
I also think it's important to say, again, as you've said, this isn't just maximizing damages, this is what you're entitled to. And I think that's an important distinction. This is actually stuff that you're supposed to be getting anyway.
Okay, we'll continue our discussion about that in the third segment. We'll look forward to seeing you in a few minutes. Welcome back to the third segment. I've got with me, and I'm sure you all have seen these, this is a policy issued by an automobile liability company, and it's got a lot of fine print in it. Now, if you can read this and understand it with the first passing, you need to come and work for us, because they make it difficult. They're trying to limit their exposure by the policies they write. But basically, the coverages that we know about, and we know hopefully how to get the most out of it that you might need. But they are difficult. To reiterate, if you have a small claim, let's just say you have $1,000 property damage, nobody gets hurt, you don't need us. You don't need any lawyers, unless there's something peculiar about it that you might need some help with. And we tell people that. We have people come in and they say, I've got a $1,000 loss, can you help me? And I said, I'll tell you what to do, but you don't need to hire us. It's too expensive. We take too big a chunk out of that, and it doesn't make any sense. So we tell them right up front, and I think they appreciate that. Now, one thing I want to reiterate in the case of uninsured motorist coverage is that you can do what's called stacking. Now, I'm going to talk about that just again because it's a concept that some people have trouble understanding. If you have uninsured coverage and you only bought $25,000 and you should buy the max $100,000, I'm going to give you an example of what happens. You have $25,000 and you have a serious injury, and $25,000 doesn't cover it. The other driver doesn't have any insurance. How can you get more coverage? You can stack them. So if you've got one policy, for example, that covers 3 automobiles, you get the uninsured on each car on that uninsured. But if you have separate policies on 5 cars, if you happen to own 5, you can stack all 5 of them. So what's the benefit of uninsured is to carry more. I would recommend everybody get at least $100,000 uninsured coverage, because if you're in that catastrophic accident and no insurance on the other side, and you've got life-threatening injuries, you're in the hospital a long time, and you know what hospital bills can do to you, or what you don't have covered, you may need a lot more than that. So if you have $100,000 and you have a catastrophic injury and you've got 5 policies on 5 different cars, guess how much coverage you got then? $500,000. So that's why it's so important. And you know that a lot of people on the road do not have insurance coverage, even though Alabama requires it. And here's what they do. They go into these, what I call substandard insurance companies. They buy a policy. They have to pay usually a month down and the first month in advance. They go get their tag, They're able to get that because they've got proof of insurance. And when that second or third month comes around, what happens? They don't pay the premium. They don't have insurance coverage anymore. Even though there's something built in so the state can check on this, they don't necessarily do it. So the more you've got on the uninsured, the better off you're going to be. And remember, it's not only uninsured, but you may be having an underinsured driver. Take the same example I just gave you. Suppose that you have substantial medical bills, substantial pain and suffering and so forth, and the other driver only has $25,000 in coverage, and that's not nearly enough. Suppose you have $100,000 in special damages. Where do you find that? You've got $100,000 policy on underinsured. You're not insured enough. They have an obligation to pay that to you. And if you've got at least 3 cars insured by it, you run up to $300,000. If you've got 5 separate policies, you can get up to $500,000 if you buy $100,000 coverage. So that's why it's so important. In the catastrophic cases, you hope you have it. Please get it, whether you, any lawyer will tell you that. Now, there is a difference, if you want to talk about it, Freeman, briefly, between the minimum $25,000 policy and when it says $25.50. What does that mean?
Yeah, just to actually, because I went over this recently with a family member who didn't understand when someone says $25.50 or $100, $300, what exactly that means. And essentially that means if you have a minimum policy of $25,000 slash 50,000, then $25,000 is the minimum. That would be for in liability coverage, and that would be for if you're in an accident and there was one person in that vehicle, then they would have access to that $25,000. If there were multiple people in the vehicle and they were hurt, then they would have access to that $50,000. And
one of the unfortunate things about that 50 is if you have several people claiming it, is how you allocate that among those 5 people. When that happens, you need a lawyer because somebody's going to get cut short, and we don't want it to be you. Okay, did you put that graphic back up about our example on underinsured again, please? Okay, now again, I want to go over this again because it's so important. Assume your damages are $10,000 and the other driver has no insurance. Your company pays. Assume that the other driver has insurance. And your damages are 10 or up to 25. They will pay their 25. Your company's not going to be obligated generally. But the real rub comes in number 3. Suppose your damages are 35 or maybe they're even 100. And the other driver has the minimum limits required by Alabama law, which is $25,000. Where can you get coverage for all your damages? I mean, suppose you're put in a nursing home for the rest of your life. You have catastrophic losses. There's never going to be enough, but there can be some help from underinsured. So your company will pay the excess over and above the $25,000. You see in this example I put 35. But suppose the damages were 100. Then you get 25 from the other driver. You can get 100 from your own company. So that sounds like a bargain to me to buy that underinsured coverage. Remember that they have to offer it to you. You can reject it. I've had a client one time who came in who rejected it, and it was in writing. They said no, they didn't. We asked for proof of it from the insurance company, and sure enough, showed it to them. They said, uh-oh, we have rejected. And I said, well, you're cut out. You're not going to get any more money, even though you have damages that exceed that. So that's why we're so strong on this. Now, I want to cover a couple of other topics. That's medical bills. You've got hospital insurance. Guess what? Under the Affordable Care Act, guess what's going to happen to you? Your premium has gone up, probably if you found out yet. If you're coming by a big company, you're not. But here's what else is going up. The copays and the deductibles are going up tremendously. And that's why this insurance coverage, uninsured and underinsured, is so important. It helps you cover those losses that your own Blue Cross policy doesn't cover. You're going to don't wait till the last minute to find out and be sorry, because after you've had the loss, you can't go back and get an insurance policy retroactive to the date of the accident. They won't do that. So remember, that's important coverage, and don't you agree, Freeman? That's something everybody should have.
Definitely. Something I would recommend strongly.
So we hope this show tonight has been informative for you about insurance. If you have a problem, feel free to call us. First meeting is free. If we can do anything for you, we will. If we can't, we'll send you to somebody who can. See you next week, I hope.